It's 1922, and archaeologists have just opened a tomb that's been sealed for over 3,000 years. Within months, people start dying. Not just anyone, but specifically the people who were there when the tomb was opened. The newspapers go wild. The mummies curse, they scream. And here's the thing, people really did die. The pattern was real, even if the explanation remains debated to this day. The coincidences are just too strange to shrug off. Tonight on Midnight Deep Dive, we're counting down 10 of history's most intriguing curses. From ancient Egyptian tombs to rock and roll tragedies, to modern internet legends. So find your most comfortable position and let yourself drift peacefully as we journey through centuries of impossible patterns and enduring legends. November 26, 1922. After years of fruitless searching in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, Howard Carter finally found what he'd been looking for: the stone steps leading down into bedrock, the sealed doorway, the intact tomb of a pharaoh who had ruled Egypt over 3 millennia ago. But this wasn't just any pharaoh. This was Tutankhamun, the boy king whose tomb had somehow escaped the grave robbers who had plundered nearly every other royal burial in the valley. When Carter and his team finally broke through into the antechamber, the sight that greeted them was beyond imagination. Golden couches shaped like mythical beasts, chariots overlaid with gold, alabaster vases, jewelry, weapons, clothing, furniture. Everything a king would need in the afterlife, preserved in the dry Egyptian air as if it had been placed there yesterday rather than 32 years ago. Lord Carnarvon, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, had funded Carter's excavation for years. He was there for the discovery, standing beside Carter as they peered into the tomb for the first time. The excitement was palpable. This was the archaeological find of the century, perhaps of all time. Newspaper reporters from around the world descended on the valley. The tomb's contents would take years to catalog and remove. But then something changed. In April 1923, just 4 months after the tomb was opened, Lord Carnarvon died in Cairo. The official cause was blood poisoning from an infected mosquito bite, complicated by pneumonia. He was 57 years old. At the moment of his death, it was said that all the lights in Cairo went out. Back in England, his dog howled and died at the exact same time. The newspapers, already fascinated by the tomb discovery, found an even better story. They remembered the stories of curses protecting Egyptian tombs. They claimed that warnings had been found inscribed at the entrance, though no such inscriptions were ever actually documented on Tutankhamun's tomb. But truth mattered less than narrative. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king, the papers claimed the curse read. And then more people connected to the excavation began to die. George J. Goode, an American financier who visited the tomb, died of pneumonia shortly after. Prince Ali Kamal Fahmy Bey of Egypt, who had also visited, was shot dead in a London hotel. Radiologist Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, died of a mysterious illness. British industrialist Joel Wolfe died of fever after visiting. Then Carter's secretary, Richard Bethel, was found dead in bed from apparent heart failure. Bethel's father then died by jumping from his 7th-floor apartment. By 1929, 11 people connected to the discovery had died, and newspapers kept a running tally. The Curse of the Pharaohs became one of the most famous supernatural legends of the 20th century. Even Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes and believer in spiritualism, publicly suggested that the deaths were the result of ancient Egyptian magic. But was there really a curse? Howard Carter himself lived until 1939, dying at age 64 of lymphoma, nearly 17 years after opening the tomb. He always dismissed the curse as Tommirot and pointed out that many people involved in the excavation lived long, healthy lives. The British Museum's Egyptologist, Sir E. A. Wallis Budge, who had examined countless mummies and opened numerous tombs, lived to be 77. In 1934, a study found that of the 26 people present when the tomb was opened, only 6 had died within a decade. The curse, statistically speaking, wasn't very effective. Modern science offers more mundane explanations. Tombs sealed for thousands of years can harbor dangerous molds and bacteria. In 1999, German microbiologist Gotthard Kramer identified several potentially dangerous mold species in ancient Egyptian tombs, including Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus flavus, which can cause allergic reactions and respiratory problems. People with weakened immune systems, like Lord Carnarvon, who had been in poor health for years following a car accident, would be particularly vulnerable. There's also the fact that tomb opening was dusty, physically demanding work in extreme heat, conducted by people who were often in their 50s and 60s, in an era before antibiotics. That some died of infections and pneumonia is hardly surprising. But the psychological power of the curse was real, even if the supernatural element wasn't. The idea that ancient Egyptians could reach across millennia to punish those who disturbed their rest captured the public imagination in a way that few stories have before or since. It spoke to a universal human intuition, that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed, that the dead deserve respect, and that there are consequences for disturbing sacred spaces. The curse of Tutankhamun's tomb also reflects the colonial attitudes of the era. Egyptian authorities were increasingly uncomfortable with foreign archaeologists removing treasures from their country. The curse narrative, in a way, represented Egyptian resistance to this cultural plundering. It suggested that Egypt itself was fighting back against those who would steal its heritage. Today, Tutankhamun's treasures are displayed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, soon to move to the new Grand Egyptian Museum. The boy king has become Egypt's most famous pharaoh, not because of his achievements in life, which were modest, but because his tomb survived intact. And the curse, it remains one of history's most enduring legends, a reminder that sometimes the stories we tell about events are more powerful than the events themselves. Imagine holding a gemstone the size of a walnut, deep blue like the ocean at twilight, with a fire inside it that seems almost alive. The Hope diamond weighs 45.52 carats and is one of the most famous jewels in the world. But according to legend, it's also one of the most cursed, leaving a trail of tragedy, madness, and death wherever it goes. The story begins in India, sometime in the 17th century. According to legend, the diamond was originally much larger, perhaps over 100 carats, and was stolen from the eye of a statue of the Hindu goddess Sita in a temple. The thief who stole it was supposedly torn apart by wild dogs as punishment for his sacrilege. The curse was born. The first documented owner was a French merchant traveler named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who acquired the diamond in India around 1666 and sold it to King Louis XIV of France. According to the legend, Tavernier was later torn apart by wild dogs in Russia, though historical records actually show he died peacefully of old age. Louis XIV had the diamond cut and recut, reducing it to 67 carats. He called it the blue diamond of the crown and wore it on special occasions. Louis XIV died of gangrene in 1715. His great-grandson, Louis XVI, inherited the diamond but wisely never wore it. He died of smallpox. Then came Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette. They both wore the diamond. Both were beheaded during the French Revolution in 1793. After their executions, during the chaos of revolutionary France, the diamond was stolen from the royal treasury and disappeared for decades. It resurfaced in London in 1839, significantly smaller at about 45 carats. Its new cut making it impossible to prove it was the same stone, though gemologists are now certain it was. A banker named Henry Philip Hope purchased it, giving the diamond its current name. Hope died in 1839, not long after acquiring it. The diamond passed through various members of the Hope family, and their fortunes declined dramatically. Lord Francis Hope, who inherited it, went bankrupt and had to sell the family jewel in 1901 to pay his debts. His marriage fell apart. The curse seemed to follow the diamond to each new owner. A Greek merchant named Simon Muntharides bought it next and promptly drove his car off a cliff with his entire family, killing everyone. The diamond was recovered and sold to a Turkish sultan, Abdul Hamid II, who gave it to his favorite concubine. He later shot her in a fit of jealousy and was himself deposed in a revolution. An American socialite named Evelyn Walsh McLean purchased the Hope diamond in 1911 from Cartier, and her life became a catalogue of tragedies. Her eldest son was killed by a car at age 9. Her daughter died of an overdose at age 25. Her husband left her for another woman and died in a mental institution. McLean herself became addicted to morphine and died deeply in debt. After her death, the famous jeweler Harry Winston purchased her entire jewelry collection, including the Hope diamond. Winston was a showman who understood the value of the curse legend for publicity. He exhibited the diamond around the world, playing up its dark history. But Winston himself suffered no ill effects. In 1958, Winston did something remarkable. He donated the Hope diamond to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., sending it through regular U.S. mail in a plain brown paper package. The postman who delivered it, James Todd, later had his leg crushed in a truck accident, his head injured in another truck accident, and his house burned down. He joked that he was the curse's final victim. Since arriving at the Smithsonian, the Hope diamond has been viewed by millions of visitors. It sits in a special case, spotlit in a darkened room, still breathtakingly beautiful. Museum staff handle it regularly for study and cleaning. None have reported any curses. So what's the truth behind the Hope diamond's curse? Historians have found that many of the curse stories were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. Tavernier died peacefully. The Sultan wasn't deposed immediately after owning the diamond. Many owners lived long, prosperous lives. The curse legend appears to have been largely invented by Pierre Cartier when he sold the diamond to Evelyn Walsh McLean. He told her elaborate stories about the diamond's cursed history to make it more exciting and valuable. McLean, who was fascinated by the occult, loved the idea of owning a cursed object. She wore it constantly and even let her dog wear it. The tragedies in McLean's life were real, but were they caused by a diamond? Or were they the ordinary sorrows that afflict many families, made more notable because of her wealth and fame? People in every era lose children, suffer through divorces, and struggle with addiction. The diamond didn't cause these things any more than it caused the French Revolution. Yet the legend persists. The Hope diamond's curse has become inseparable from its identity. Visitors to the Smithsonian peer at it with a mixture of admiration and unease. It's beautiful, yes, but is it also dangerous? The psychological truth is that we're drawn to stories of cursed objects because they offer explanations for inexplicable tragedies. When terrible things happen to people, especially wealthy and powerful people who seem like they should be protected from misfortune, we want to understand why. A curse provides a narrative, a reason, a sense that the universe operates according to rules, even if those rules involve ancient Hindu goddesses and vengeful gemstones. The Hope diamond rests safely in Washington, its curse, if it ever existed, apparently satisfied by its retirement from private ownership. It no longer adorns the necks of queens or socialites. It belongs to everyone and no one, a masterpiece of nature and human craftsmanship, a window into deep time and deep earth, and perhaps the most famous example of how objects can accumulate stories until the stories become more valuable than the objects themselves. In theaters around the world, there's a rule that every actor knows. Never say the name Macbeth inside a theater unless you're performing the play. Instead, they call it the Scottish play or the Bard's play. If someone accidentally speaks the forbidden name, they must immediately leave the theater, spin around 3 times, spit, curse, and knock on the door to be let back in. Some add reciting a line from another Shakespeare play or quoting Hamlet's, "Angels and ministers of grace defend us." This is not a recent superstition. It goes back centuries, and it exists because of the extraordinary number of accidents, injuries, and deaths that have occurred during productions of Macbeth since it was first performed around 1606. The trouble may have started at the very first performance. According to legend, the boy actor who was supposed to play Lady Macbeth died suddenly just before the premiere, and Shakespeare himself had to step into the role. While this story is likely apocryphal, it set the tone for what was to come. In 1672, at the Amsterdam Playhouse, the actor playing Macbeth used a real dagger instead of a prop, and actually killed the actor playing King Duncan on stage in front of the audience. Whether this was an accident or intentional was never determined. In 1721, a performance was disrupted by a riot in the audience. In 1849, at the Astor Place Opera House in New York, a production sparked riots between supporters of 2 rival actors that left 25 people dead and over 100 injured. It remains one of the deadliest theater-related incidents in American history. In 1937, Laurence Olivier's Macbeth was plagued by disasters. A stage weight crashed within inches of Olivier's head. The director was involved in a serious car accident. The theater owner died of a heart attack. The same production featured actress Judith Anderson, who would later say it was the most difficult and accident-prone production she'd ever been part of. In 1942, at the Old Vic Theatre in London, 3 actors playing Duncan died during the play's run. One literally died on stage during a performance. The costume and set designer took their own life, and actor John Gielgud narrowly escaped death when a sword broke during the fight scene, and the tip flew past his head. In 1948, actress Diana Wynyard was nearly blinded when stage lights exploded. In 1953, Charlton Heston suffered severe burns when his tights caught fire from a stage torch. In 1967, the entire Bermuda Repertory Company was involved in a car accident while on tour with the play. More recently, in 1988, a production at Lincoln Center starring Christopher Plummer was plagued by problems. One actor fell off the stage and broke both legs. Another stumbled into the orchestra pit. Equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. The list goes on and on. Scenery collapses, swords break, actors injure themselves, technical equipment fails. Someone always seems to get hurt during a production of Macbeth. So why is this play cursed? One theory involves witchcraft. Macbeth features 3 witches who perform a ritual and chant real incantations from actual witch covens, or so the story goes. Some believe that Shakespeare used authentic magical spells he'd learned from real witches, and that performing these spells on stage invokes genuinely dark forces. When the play premiered, witches in the audience were supposedly so outraged that they cursed the production. This explanation is theatrical folklore rather than historical fact, but it speaks to something real. Macbeth deals with dark themes: regicide, ambition, murder, madness, guilt, the supernatural. It's a play where the natural order is completely overturned, where children are murdered, where a good man becomes a monster, where sanity dissolves. Perhaps performing these dark themes repeatedly has psychological effects on casts and crews. A more practical explanation is that Macbeth has always been a popular play to produce when theaters are struggling financially. It has a relatively small cast, requires minimal sets, and draws audiences because of its name recognition. Struggling theaters often have aging equipment, overworked staff, and corners cut on safety. More productions mean more chances for accidents. The play also features extensive sword fighting and battle scenes. Before modern stage combat training became standardized, these scenes were genuinely dangerous. Add period-appropriate staging with real torches, heavy curtains, and wooden sets, and you have a recipe for accidents even without supernatural intervention. There's also confirmation bias at play. When an accident happens during Hamlet or King Lear, it's just an accident. When an accident happens during Macbeth, it's the curse. People remember the Macbeth accidents and forget the others. Yet the superstition itself may now be creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Actors who believe in the curse approach Macbeth productions with anxiety and stress. Stress leads to distraction. Distraction leads to mistakes. The nervousness about the curse may actually cause the very accidents that reinforce belief in the curse. Despite all this, or perhaps because of it, Macbeth remains one of Shakespeare's most frequently performed plays. Actors want to tackle the role of Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. Directors want to create their vision of the Scottish castle and the heath where the witches gather. Audiences want to see ambition and murder play out on stage. The curse has become part of the play's identity, adding an extra frisson of danger to every production. When you attend a performance of Macbeth, you're not just watching Shakespeare's tragedy about a man who murders his way to the throne. You're participating in a ritual that might invoke forces beyond understanding. You're taking a small risk just by being in the audience. And perhaps that's appropriate for a play whose most famous line is double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. If there's any play that should be cursed, it's this one. The curse feels right. It fits the darkness at the play's heart. Theater people will continue to call it the Scottish play. They'll continue to perform the cleansing ritual when someone speaks the forbidden name. And productions will continue to experience accidents that seem just slightly too frequent to be entirely random. Whether the curse is real or simply theatrical tradition doesn't really matter. The ritual of respecting the curse has become part of theater culture, a way of acknowledging that some performances traffic in forces larger than mere entertainment. It's a reminder that words have power, that names matter, and that sometimes the best way to handle dark things is to treat them with caution and respect, just in case. In American history, there's a pattern so precise, so eerie, that it's hard to dismiss as mere coincidence. For over a century, every U.S. president elected in a year ending in 0 died in office. Every single one. 7 presidents spanning 120 years, all meeting their ends before their terms concluded. It's known as the curse of Tippecanoe, or Tecumseh's curse, and it's one of the strangest patterns in American political history. The curse allegedly began in 1811 during the Battle of Tippecanoe in present-day Indiana. William Henry Harrison, then governor of the Indiana Territory, led American forces against a confederation of Native American tribes. The Native American coalition was led by Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet. The battle was brutal and controversial. Harrison's forces prevailed, but at a significant cost. The Native American village was burned. According to legend, Tenskwatawa placed a curse on Harrison, declaring that he and every future president elected in a year ending in 0 would die in office. Some versions say it was Tecumseh himself who uttered the curse. Whether the curse was actually spoken is disputed. No contemporary accounts mention it. The story seems to have emerged later after the pattern became apparent, but the pattern itself, that was real. William Henry Harrison was elected president in 1840. He gave the longest inaugural address in American history, speaking for nearly 2 hours in cold, wet weather without a coat. He caught pneumonia and died exactly 1 month later, on April 4, 1841. He was the first president to die in office and served the shortest term of any president. The curse had claimed its first victim, if it existed. 20 years later, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected. His presidency oversaw the Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in American history. On April 14, 1865, just days after the war ended, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. He died the next morning. The pattern continued. In 1880, James A. Garfield was elected. On July 2, 1881, just 4 months into his presidency, he was shot by Charles Guiteau, a disappointed office-seeker, at a railroad station. Garfield lingered for 80 days before dying on September 19, 1881. 3 presidents elected in years ending in 0, all dead in office. William McKinley was elected in 1900, technically re-elected as he'd first been elected in 1896. On September 6, 1901, he was shot by anarchist Leon C. Zalgas at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. He died 8 days later from gangrene caused by the bullet wounds. The 20-year pattern held. In 1920, Warren G. Harding was elected. His presidency was plagued by scandals involving his cabinet members, though Harding himself wasn't directly implicated. On August 2, 1923, while on a tour of the western United States, Harding died suddenly in San Francisco. The official cause was a heart attack, though some suspected poisoning. Regardless, he died in office. Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected in 1940, his 3rd term. He'd first been elected in 1932. By 1945, he was in his 4th term and in failing health. On April 12, 1945, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage at his retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia. 6 presidents elected in 0 years, all dead in office. Then came 1960 and John F. Kennedy. Young, charismatic, full of promise. On November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, Kennedy was assassinated while riding in a motorcade. The entire nation watched the coverage on television. The curse had struck again, right on schedule. By this point, the pattern was impossible to ignore. 7 presidents, elected exactly 20 years apart, all dying in office. The causes varied wildly: illness, assassination, natural causes, but the pattern was constant. News media discussed the curse openly. Historians tried to find rational explanations. Statisticians calculated the odds. What are the chances of this happening randomly? Actually, not as impossible as you might think. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, presidential health care was far from modern standards. Pneumonia, infections, and other diseases that are now easily treatable were often fatal. Security for presidents was minimal compared to today. 4 of the 7 deaths were assassinations, reflecting an era when anyone could walk up to a president with a gun. Still, the specific 20-year pattern is striking. Why exactly 20 years? Why only presidents elected in years ending in 0? In 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected, and people remembered the curse, when he was shot by John Hinckley Jr. On March 30, 1981, it seemed the curse would continue. The bullet came within inches of his heart. Reagan nearly died from blood loss. But he survived, becoming the first president elected in a 0 year to complete his term alive. Had Reagan broken the curse? Or had modern medicine simply intervened? His survival involved immediate Secret Service response, rapid transport to a trauma center, and expert surgical care. A century earlier, the same wound would almost certainly have been fatal. In 2000, George W. Bush was elected after a contested election and Supreme Court decision. There were threats and close calls, including a grenade attack during a visit to Georgia, the country, not the state, but Bush completed both terms unharmed. The pattern appeared to be broken. As of now, the curse remains dormant. So what explains the curse of Tippecanoe? Was it ever real? Skeptics point out that the curse story itself doesn't appear in historical records until after several presidents had already died. It may be a case of retroactive pattern finding, Humans are excellent at seeing patterns, even in random data. Once you have a few data points, it's easy to draw a line through them and declare it significant. The clustering of assassinations in the 19th and early 20th centuries reflects the political violence of that era. Presidential security was almost non-existent. Anyone with a gun and a grievance could get close enough to shoot. As security improved, assassinations became much more difficult. The deaths from illness reflect the limited medical knowledge of earlier eras and the incredible stress of the presidency, which can exacerbate existing health conditions. Yet the pattern endured for 120 years, exact to the decade. That's what makes the curse of Tippecanoe so fascinating. Even if it's just coincidence, it's an extraordinary coincidence. 7 presidents, 20 years apart exactly, all dying in office. Today, the curse of Tippecanoe is largely remembered as a historical curiosity. But every 20 years, when a new president is elected in a year ending in 0, someone always remembers. They wonder if this time the pattern will resume. They watch and wait, aware that sometimes history creates patterns that seem too precise to be random, too persistent to ignore, and too eerie to entirely dismiss, even when logic suggests we should. On September 19, 1991, 2 German hikers were trekking through the Ötzi Alps on the border between Austria and Italy, when they spotted something brown protruding from the ice. At first, they thought it might be garbage or a discarded doll. As they got closer, they realized with horror that they were looking at a human body, frozen and mummified, emerging from a melting glacier. What they'd discovered was extraordinary: a natural mummy over 5,000 years old, preserved by ice since the Copper Age. He would become known as Ötzi, the Iceman, one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Scientists could study his clothing, his tools, his last meal, even his DNA. He provided an unprecedented window into life in prehistoric Europe. But according to some, the discovery came with a price. A curse that would claim the lives of several people connected to the Iceman. The first alleged victim was Rainer Henn, the forensic pathologist who first examined Ötzi's remains. In 1992, just a year after the discovery, Henn died in a car accident while traveling to give a lecture about the Iceman. His car was struck head-on. He was 64 years old. Next was Kurt Fritz, a mountain guide who had helped with the recovery of the body from the glacier. In 1993, Fritz died in an avalanche in the same mountain range where Ötzi was found. He was the only person in his group to be killed. Experienced mountain guides know how to read avalanche conditions, yet somehow Fritz was caught and buried. Rainer Herzl, a journalist who extensively filmed the recovery of Ötzi's body, died of a brain tumor in 2004. Helmut Simon, one of the 2 hikers who originally discovered the mummy, died in 2004 during a hiking accident. He fell to his death during a blizzard in the same mountain range where he'd found Ötzi 13 years earlier. His body wasn't found for over a week, emerging from snow and ice just as Ötzi's had. Dieter Warneck, the head of the mountain rescue team that recovered Simon's body, died of a heart attack just hours after Simon's funeral. He was 45 years old and had no history of heart problems. Konrad Spindler, an archaeologist who was the first to estimate Ötzi's age and had studied the mummy extensively, died of complications from multiple sclerosis in 2005. Before his death, he joked about the curse, saying, "I think it's a load of rubbish. It is all for the media. The next thing you will be saying, I will be next." Tom Loy, a scientist who discovered traces of blood from 4 different people on Ötzi's clothing and weapons, died of a hereditary blood disease in 2005 while working on a book about the Iceman. That's 7 people connected to Ötzi's discovery and study who died, some in unusual circumstances. The media quickly dubbed it the Curse of Ötzi or the Iceman's Curse, drawing comparisons to King Tut's tomb. But how valid is this curse? Let's consider the facts. The discovery of Ötzi involved hundreds of people: hikers, police, archaeologists, journalists, museum staff, scientists from multiple countries. 7 deaths out of hundreds of people involved, spread over 14 years, isn't statistically unusual. In any large group of people followed over 14 years, you'd expect several deaths from natural causes, accidents, and illness. Look at the causes of death more closely. Rainer Henn died in a car accident, but car accidents are tragically common. Kurt Fritz died in an avalanche, but he was a mountain guide who spent his life in dangerous mountain conditions. Rainer Herzl died of brain cancer after 57 years of life, a terrible disease, but hardly supernatural. The others died of heart attacks, complications from pre-existing conditions, and old age. Helmut Simon's death is perhaps the most eerie, since he died in the mountains where he found Ötzi. But Simon was 67 years old and hiking in challenging conditions during a storm. Even experienced hikers make fatal mistakes. Konrad Spindler died from multiple sclerosis, a disease he'd been diagnosed with before he ever worked on Ötzi. His joking comment about being next for the curse became darkly prophetic in retrospect, but MS is a progressive disease. His death, while sad, was not unexpected. What's more, many prominent scientists who worked extensively with Ötzi have had no curse-related problems. Eduard Egarter-Vigel, who has been responsible for Ötzi's preservation since the beginning and handles the mummy regularly, was still alive and well as of recent reports. Angelika Fleckinger, director of the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology, where Ötzi is housed, has had no unusual misfortunes. Neither have countless other researchers who have studied the mummy. From a scientific perspective, there's no curse. There's simply the normal statistical distribution of deaths in a large group of people over time, amplified by media attention and human pattern-seeking behavior. But why does the curse legend persist? Part of it is the timeless human tendency to see patterns and assign meaning to coincidence. 7 deaths connected to one discovery make a compelling narrative, even if those deaths are explained by ordinary causes. There's also something deeply unsettling about Ötzi himself. This isn't an ancient Egyptian mummy prepared with religious rituals and placed ceremoniously in a tomb. This is a murder victim. Scientific analysis has revealed that Ötzi died violently, an arrow lodged in his shoulder, evidence of a blow to the head, defensive wounds on his hands. He was killed by someone and left to die on the mountain. Imagine being the person who murdered Ötzi 53 years ago. You shot him with an arrow, possibly fought with him, and left him to die alone in the mountains. You thought you'd gotten away with it. But then, over 5 millennia later, his body emerges from the ice, perfectly preserved. Scientists study his wounds, extract DNA from his clothing, discover the blood of his attackers. The murder is exposed, the evidence preserved by the ice. There's something almost supernatural about that level of preservation and revelation. Ötzi becomes a voice from the deep past, a witness to his own murder, evidence that time doesn't always erase crimes. The curse legend also reflects our complicated relationship with disturbing the dead. Ötzi didn't choose to be displayed in a museum. He didn't consent to being studied, prodded, x-rayed, and examined. He was violently killed and his body left on a mountain. Then, 5,000 years later, strangers pulled him from his frozen grave and put him on display. The curse gives Ötzi agency. It suggests he's not just a passive object of scientific study, but an active presence who can respond to how he's treated. It's a way of acknowledging that there's something ethically complex about disturbing ancient remains, even in the name of science. Today, Ötzi rests in a specially designed cold chamber at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy. Visitors can view him through a small window. He lies on his side, looking much as he must have when the hikers first spotted him emerging from the ice. His copper axe, his clothing, his tools are all carefully preserved and displayed nearby. The curse, it remains a legend, compelling but unsupported by evidence. Yet it persists in popular imagination because it transforms Ötzi from an archaeological specimen into something more. A person with power, a murder victim who won't rest quietly, a voice from 53 years ago reminding us that death is the one thing that unites all humans across time. Whether you believe in the curse or dismiss it as coincidence, Ötzi himself is real and remarkable, and continues to teach us about human life in prehistoric Europe. Perhaps that's the real legacy, not a curse, but an extraordinary gift of knowledge from the deep past. In June 1941, Soviet archaeologist Mikhail Gerasimov stood before an ancient tomb in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. He was about to open the burial vault of Timur, also known as Tamerlane, the 14th century conqueror who had built one of history's largest empires through ruthless military campaigns. Inside the tomb, Gerasimov and his team could see inscriptions. One of them, according to various accounts, read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." Another supposedly warned, "Whosoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." Despite these warnings, and despite the protests of local elders who begged them not to disturb the conqueror's rest, the Soviet team opened the tomb on June 19, 1941. They needed to study the remains, to measure the skeleton, to confirm historical accounts of Timur's legendary limp. Science demanded it. 3 days later, on June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. 3 million German soldiers poured across the Soviet border. The Soviets were caught almost completely unprepared. The invasion would eventually claim over 25 million Soviet lives and become the deadliest theater of World War II. The timing was impossible to ignore. The tomb was opened on June 19. Hitler invaded on June 22, 3 days. The prophecy, if it existed, had come true with terrifying precision. Timur had promised that disturbing his rest would unleash a terrible invader, and Hitler certainly qualified. But the story doesn't end there. As the war turned increasingly desperate for the Soviet Union, as German forces pushed deeper into Soviet territory and Leningrad came under brutal siege, someone remembered the curse. In November 1942, the Soviet government ordered that Timur's remains be returned to his tomb and reburied with full Islamic rites and proper honors. The reburial took place in December 1942. Within weeks, the tide of the war began to turn. The Battle of Stalingrad, which had been raging since August, reached its climax in February 1943 with a decisive Soviet victory. It was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany's Eastern campaign. From that point forward, Soviet forces would be on the offensive, slowly but surely pushing German forces back toward Berlin. This is the legend of Timur's curse, and it's one of the most dramatic curse stories in modern history because it involves the largest war humanity has ever fought. But what's the truth behind the legend? First, let's talk about Timur himself. Born in 1336 in what is now Uzbekistan, Timur was a military genius who conquered vast territories across Central Asia, Persia, India, and into Russia and the Mediterranean. He was brutal even by the standards of his time, known for building pyramids of skulls from conquered cities. His empire stretched from Turkey to India, from Russia to the Persian Gulf. Timur died in 1405 while planning an invasion of China. He was buried in a magnificent tomb called Guri Amir in Samarkand. The tomb became a pilgrimage site, and over the centuries, legends grew around it. Some stories said that disturbing Timur's grave would bring catastrophe. Whether these warnings were actually inscribed on the tomb or were later additions to the legend is debated. Now about those inscriptions. Different versions of the story report different wordings, and some historians doubt whether the dramatic warnings ever existed at all. The inscriptions that definitely did exist were standard Islamic funerary texts, not ominous prophecies. The curse warnings might have been folklore shared by local guardians of the tomb, rather than actual written inscriptions. The timing of the tomb opening and Operation Barbarossa is genuinely striking, just 3 days apart. But timing alone doesn't prove causation. Operation Barbarossa was months in the planning. Hitler had been preparing for the invasion of the Soviet Union since the summer of 1940. The date was set long before anyone opened Timur's tomb. The invasion was originally scheduled for May, but was delayed due to the German campaign in the Balkans. It's pure coincidence that Soviet archaeologists happened to open the tomb just 3 days before the invasion. A dramatic, eerie coincidence, but a coincidence nonetheless. The reburial in December 1942 and the subsequent Soviet victories make for a compelling narrative. But again, correlation isn't causation. The Battle of Stalingrad turned in the Soviets' favor due to military strategy, brutal winter conditions, German overextension, and Soviet determination. The reburial happened during the battle, not before it. Moreover, Soviet victories in 1943 and onward had everything to do with the Red Army's reorganization. Better military leadership after Stalin purged incompetent commanders, American and British material aid through the Lend-Lease program, German strategic mistakes, and the gradual attrition of German forces. But here's what makes this curse legend particularly interesting. The Soviet government took it seriously, or at least seriously enough to order the reburial. Whether this was genuine belief in the curse, respect for local cultural beliefs, or a propaganda opportunity to boost morale by claiming they'd fixed the problem is unclear. Perhaps all three. The decision to rebury Timur properly might also reflect the Soviet leadership's desperate situation in late 1942. When you're losing the largest war in history, when German forces are threatening to destroy your entire nation, you take any possible advantage. If there's even a small chance that a curse is real, or if properly honoring a legendary conqueror might boost your soldiers' morale or please local populations in Central Asia, why not do it? There's also a deeper layer to this story. Timur was a Muslim conqueror, and the Soviet Union was officially atheist. The decision to perform full Islamic burial rites for Timur's remains represented a significant concession to religious practice at a time when the Soviet government typically suppressed religion. This suggests that either the Soviet leadership genuinely worried about the curse, or they recognized the propaganda value of respecting local religious traditions during wartime. The curse of Timur also reflects Central Asian cultural memory. Timur is a complex figure in that region, both a brutal conqueror and a celebrated empire builder. The legend that disturbing his grave could unleash catastrophe might represent local people's way of protecting an important cultural site from destruction or desecration. What Gerasimov and his team actually found in the tomb was fascinating from a scientific perspective. Timur's skeleton confirmed that he was lame in his right leg and missing 2 fingers from his right hand, matching historical descriptions. They were able to reconstruct his appearance and confirm details of his life that had previously been disputed. The artifacts in the tomb were magnificent carved jade, precious metals, intricate Islamic calligraphy. The tomb itself is an architectural masterpiece, with its ribbed azure dome visible across Samarkand. Today, Guri-Amir remains one of Uzbekistan's most important historical sites. Timur's remains rest undisturbed and probably will forever. No one is eager to test whether the curse has any power left. The legend of Timur's curse endures because it takes one of history's most consequential events, the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, and gives it a supernatural dimension. It suggests that ancient powers still matter in modern warfare, that the dead can influence the living, and that some boundaries should not be crossed no matter what science demands. Whether you believe in the curse or see it as a remarkable coincidence woven into effective Soviet propaganda, the story captures something profound about human nature. Even in the age of tanks and aircraft, of ideology and industrial warfare, we still tell stories about ancient warriors and their warnings from beyond the grave. We still wonder if perhaps the old legends contain more truth than we'd like to admit. There's a pattern in rock and roll history that's so precise, so eerie, that it feels like something more than coincidence. Some of music's brightest stars, artists who burned with extraordinary creative intensity, have died at exactly the same age. 27 years old, not 26, not 28, 27. The list reads like a tragic roll call of musical genius. Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, all dead at 27, all taken at the height of their powers, leaving behind catalogs of brilliant work and the haunting question, why 27? The phenomenon is known as the 27 Club, and while some dismiss it as statistical coincidence amplified by selective memory, others see it as evidence of something darker, a genuine curse that claims the most talented young musicians before they can reach 30. The 27 Club entered public consciousness in the early 1970s, during a devastating 2-year period that saw 4 legendary musicians die at the same age. It began with Brian Jones in July 1969. Jones was the founder of the Rolling Stones, a talented multi-instrumentalist whose blues obsession had shaped the band's early sound. But by 1969, drug use and erratic behavior had led to his dismissal from the group he'd created. Less than a month after being fired, Jones drowned in his swimming pool under circumstances that have never been fully explained. He was 27 years old. Then came Jimi Hendrix in September 1970. Hendrix had revolutionized guitar playing, creating sounds no one had imagined possible before he picked up his Stratocaster. His performances were transcendent, his recordings groundbreaking. He died in London, choking on his own vomit after taking sleeping pills, mixing them with alcohol. 27 years old. 16 days later, Janis Joplin was found dead in a Hollywood hotel room. She'd overdosed on heroin that was purer than what she was used to, a tragically common cause of overdose death. Joplin's voice had been a force of nature, raw and powerful and emotionally devastating. She'd recorded her final album just days before her death. She was 27. The deaths came so close together, and the victims were so prominent that the music world reeled. 3 of the era's most important artists, all dead within 14 months, all at age 27. It seemed impossible that this could be random. Then in July 1971, Jim Morrison died in Paris. The Doors' enigmatic frontman had been struggling with alcohol abuse and had moved to France to escape the pressures of fame. He died in a bathtub, possibly of a heart attack, possibly of a heroin overdose. The circumstances were murky and remained disputed, but his age was clear, 27. 4 iconic musicians, 4 deaths in 2 years, all at 27. The 27 Club had announced itself with devastating force. But the pattern didn't start in the late 1960s. Looking back, researchers found earlier members. Robert Johnson, the legendary blues guitarist whose skills were so extraordinary that rumors claimed he'd sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads, died in 1938 at age 27, poisoned by a jealous husband. His death had helped establish the archetype of the doomed genius musician long before rock and roll existed. For 2 decades after Morrison's death, the 27 Club remained a dark piece of rock history trivia. Then in 1994, it claimed another massive star, Kurt Cobain. Cobain's death hit differently than the others because it was by his own hand. The Nirvana frontman, who'd become the voice of a generation almost against his will, struggled with chronic pain, drug addiction, and the pressures of fame. In April 1994, he died of a self-inflicted shotgun wound at his Seattle home. He was 27 years old. Cobain's death brought the 27 Club back into cultural consciousness. People remembered Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison, and Jones. They noted the pattern. Media coverage extensively discussed the curse, analyzing whether Cobain's death was somehow connected to this tragic tradition. Some noted that Cobain had been aware of the 27 Club. His mother, upon hearing of his death, reportedly said, "Now he's gone and joined that stupid club." Whether the curse was on his mind, whether it influenced his thinking during his darkest moments, we can never know. The pattern held for another 17 years. Then, in July 2011, Amy Winehouse was found dead in her London apartment. The British soul singer, whose powerful voice and deeply personal songwriting had made her one of the most acclaimed artists of her generation, had struggled publicly with alcohol and drug addiction. The coroner's report showed she died of alcohol poisoning. She was 27 years old. Winehouse's death felt particularly cruel because she'd been trying to get clean. She'd survived multiple overdoses and health scares. The night she died, her blood alcohol level was more than 5 times the legal driving limit. Her talent had been undeniable, her struggles tragically public. And now she'd become the latest member of rock's most infamous club. So what explains the 27 Club? Is it really a curse, or is it statistical artifact combined with selective memory? Skeptics point out that when you look at the full population of famous musicians who have died young, 27 isn't actually overrepresented. Plenty of musicians have died at 25, 26, 28, or 29. We just don't remember them as clearly because they don't fit the pattern. A 2011 study published in the British Medical Journal analyzed the deaths of musicians and found no statistical spike at age 27. Famous musicians in general have higher mortality rates than the general population throughout their 20s and 30s, but no particular curse at 27 specifically. The researchers suggested that the 27 Club is a result of confirmation bias. We notice and remember the 27-year-old deaths because they fit the narrative, and we forget or downplay deaths at other ages. But defenders of the curse point out that it's not just about numbers. It's about who died at 27. These weren't minor artists or one-hit wonders. They were generational talents, musicians who changed their genres, influenced countless other artists, and created enduring work that's still celebrated decades later. The quality and cultural impact of the 27 Club members is what makes the pattern feel meaningful. If a dozen mediocre musicians had died at 27, no one would care. But when you're talking about Hendrix, Cobain, and Winehouse, artists whose absences fundamentally changed music history, the pattern demands attention. There's also something psychologically compelling about 27 as an age. You're no longer in your early 20s, that period of youth when recklessness seems almost expected. You're approaching 30, when maturity supposedly begins. 27 is an in-between age. Old enough to have achieved great things, young enough that death feels particularly tragic. For musicians, the late 20s can be a particularly challenging period. The initial rush of fame has worn off. The destructive behaviors that might have seemed manageable or even romantic at 22 have had 5 years to establish themselves as serious problems. The pressure to follow up early success is intense. For those struggling with addiction or mental health issues, this can be a critical period. The fame factor is crucial too. The members of the 27 Club weren't just talented musicians. They were stars at a level that brings extraordinary pressure, constant public scrutiny, easy access to drugs, and isolation from normal life. That combination can be deadly. There's also the dark reality of addiction itself. For people using heroin or abusing alcohol heavily, the late 20s is statistically when many serious health consequences begin to manifest. Tolerance builds, meaning higher doses are needed for the same effect, increasing overdose risk. Organs begin to fail. The body that could bounce back from abuse at 21 can't manage it at 27. Some artists have spoken about feeling the weight of the 27 club as they approach that age. They've expressed fear, superstition, or dark jokes about whether they'd survive to 28. This awareness itself might contribute to anxiety and stress during that year, potentially worsening existing mental health struggles. The members of the 27 Club left behind extraordinary music that continues to move and inspire people decades after their deaths. But listening to their work now carries the weight of knowing how the story ends, of hearing genius mixed with pain, of recognizing that sometimes the brightest flames really do burn out the fastest. That's not a supernatural curse. That's just a particularly heartbreaking way that life sometimes unfolds. In 1996, Nintendo released Pokémon Red and Green in Japan, launching one of the most successful media franchises in history. The games were simple but addictive adventures where players captured and trained pocket monsters. Children across Japan became obsessed with catching all 151 Pokémon. But according to an urban legend that spread through the early internet, something was wrong with one location in the game. Lavender Town, a small settlement where the game's narrative dealt with death and ghost-type Pokémon, had background music that was allegedly killing children. The legend claimed that in the months after Pokémon Red and Green's release, hundreds of Japanese children between the ages of 7 and 12 became ill, experienced severe headaches and nosebleeds, and some even died by taking their own life. The cause, the Lavender Town background music, which supposedly used high-frequency tones that affected children's developing brains. According to the creepypasta, the music induced psychological distress, hallucinations, and self-harm ideation in young players. The symptoms were supposedly so widespread that they earned a name, Lavender Town Syndrome. The legend claimed that Nintendo quickly recalled and modified the games, changing the music in later versions to remove the dangerous frequencies. The story spread rapidly through gaming forums and creepypasta websites in the late 2000s. Detailed evidence was presented. Lists of alleged victims, analysis of the music's frequency spectrum, claims that beta versions of the game contained even more dangerous audio, and screenshots of supposed Japanese news reports about the epidemic. Some versions of the legend included even darker details. They claimed that the original beta version of Lavender Town's music was deliberately designed by a rogue Nintendo employee as an experiment in psychological manipulation. Others said the developer went insane and killed himself after seeing what his music had caused. The legend was compelling because it contained plausible elements. Lavender Town really is unusually dark for a children's game. It's a town built around Pokémon Tower, a cemetery for deceased Pokémon. The music is genuinely eerie, a simple, high-pitched melody with an unsettling quality. The narrative involves ghost Pokémon, dead Pokémon, and themes of loss that were sophisticated for a Game Boy title marketed to children. High-frequency sound can theoretically affect hearing and cause discomfort, especially in children whose hearing range extends higher than adults. The idea that certain frequencies could cause negative psychological effects isn't completely absurd. Infrasound and ultrasound can affect human physiology in various ways. But here's the reality. Lavender Town Syndrome never existed. Not a single documented case. 0 deaths. No hospitalizations. No epidemic. It's completely fictional. Let's break down why this legend is false. First, no Japanese news organization ever reported on children dying or becoming ill from Pokémon. If hundreds of children had experienced medical emergencies from a video game, it would have been international news. Pokémon was already a phenomenon by 1996. any health crisis would have been covered extensively. Second, frequency analysis of the Lavender Town music reveals nothing unusual. The music does use higher frequencies than other game music, giving it a thin, eerie quality. But these frequencies are well within the normal range of human hearing, and are no higher than countless other sounds children encounter daily. Third, Nintendo never recalled or modified the game music for health reasons. There were different versions of the games released over time, and some regional differences in music, but these were standard business decisions, not emergency health responses. Fourth, the human brain doesn't work the way the legend suggests. While sound can certainly affect mood and emotions, there's no frequency combination that can directly cause the specific symptoms described in the legend: headaches, nosebleeds, self-harm ideation, especially not from the limited audio capabilities of a Game Boy speaker. The Game Boy's audio hardware couldn't even produce the kinds of complex frequency combinations that would be needed for any sort of psychological manipulation. It had 4 basic sound channels with limited capabilities. The Lavender Town music is simple, a high-pitched melody with a basic bass line. That's it. So where did this legend come from? Lavender Town Syndrome appears to have originated as a creepypasta internet horror fiction. Sometime in the mid-2000s, about a decade after Pokemon's release, someone created the story as entertainment, posting it on forums dedicated to video game urban legends. Other people added details, created fake evidence, and elaborated on the original story. The legend works because Lavender Town really is unsettling. The music is deliberately creepy. The themes of death are unusual for a children's game. Players who visited Lavender Town as children remember feeling genuinely spooked by it. The legend taps into real memories of discomfort and retroactively explains them with a dark conspiracy. It's also part of a broader category of cursed video game legends. These stories claim that certain games, or certain versions of games, contain hidden content that's disturbing or dangerous. They play on our sense that there might be secret levels, hidden messages, or dark intentions buried in familiar entertainment. The legend spread effectively because it contained pseudoscientific language. Talk of frequency analysis and beta versions gave it a veneer of credibility. Fake documentation and screenshots made it seem researched and verified. Young people discovering Pokemon years after its release would hear about Lavender Town Syndrome and approach the music with expectation and anxiety. Confirmation bias would kick in any slight discomfort or unease, while listening would seem to validate the legend. The power of suggestion is real, even when the curse isn't. What's particularly interesting about Lavender Town Syndrome is how it demonstrates the evolution of modern folklore. This isn't an ancient curse or a historical legend. It was created out of whole cloth on the internet and spread globally within years. It shows how digital age curse legends can form and spread with remarkable speed. The legend also reveals our anxieties about technology and children. Parents worried about video games affecting their kids found a story that validated those concerns. The idea that a game could harm children through subliminal audio played into existing fears about screen time and digital media. Today, you can listen to Lavender Town music on YouTube. Thousands of people have. Many comment about feeling uneasy or scared, but this is the power of suggestion combined with genuinely creepy composition. No one has died. No one has experienced the symptoms described in the legend. The real curse of Lavender Town isn't supernatural. It's the power of a well-crafted legend to create fear where none is warranted, and to make us question our own memories and experiences. When we revisit childhood games with adult knowledge of their supposed dark secrets, we reinterpret innocent discomfort as evidence of danger. Lavender Town Syndrome is a perfect internet-age curse. Completely fictional, widely believed, supported by fake evidence, and impossible to definitively disprove to someone who wants to believe. It shows how in the digital age, curses don't need ancient origins or mysterious artifacts. They just need a good story and a willing audience. In the late 1980s, the Kleenex company in Japan produced a television commercial that would become one of the most famous, cursed pieces of media in Japanese urban legend. The ad was simple and strange. It featured a woman in white holding a Kleenex tissue box, standing in a traditional Japanese room. An Oni demon, wearing red makeup and horns, appeared behind her. Eerie music played in the background. The commercial was surreal, unsettling, and effective enough to be memorable. Then the stories began. According to legend, everyone involved in the production of the commercial experienced terrible misfortune. The actress who played the woman in white allegedly died in a car accident shortly after filming. The actor playing the Oni took their own life. The director developed a severe illness. Crew members experienced a string of bad luck. The commercial itself was said to be cursed, bringing misfortune to anyone who watched it. The legend spread through word of mouth and later through the early internet. People claimed that watching the commercial would bring bad luck. Some versions said that if you watched it alone at night, you'd experience supernatural phenomena. The curse became so notorious that the commercial was supposedly pulled from air and never rebroadcast. But the Kleenex commercial wasn't the only Japanese advertisement allegedly cursed. There were others. A commercial for a phone company featured a young woman and her dog. According to legend, the woman died in a car accident and the dog died shortly after. Anyone involved in the production supposedly experienced misfortune. A coffee commercial featured two actors having a conversation in a cafe. The legend claimed both actors died within months of the commercial airing, and the cafe location burned down. These stories accumulated and merged in the telling, creating a whole category of cursed commercials in Japanese urban folklore. The internet age amplified these legends, with websites dedicated to cataloging cursed media and warning people not to watch them. But here's what's actually true. The Kleenex commercial did exist and was genuinely strange by advertising standards. Japanese advertising in the 1980s often employed surreal imagery that would be unusual in Western markets. The combination of traditional Japanese aesthetics with modern commercial purposes sometimes created unsettling juxtapositions. However, the cast and crew did not experience unusual levels of tragedy. The actress continued working and lived a normal life. The director had a successful career. There's no evidence of any curse-related deaths or accidents. The commercial was pulled from rotation, but not because of a curse. It was simply the end of the advertising campaign. Companies rotate commercials regularly. The gap between when it aired and when legend claimed it was pulled due to curses is explained by normal business practices. So why did these legends develop around Japanese commercials, specifically? Part of it relates to Japanese cultural attitudes toward media and supernatural phenomena. Japanese folklore has a rich tradition of cursed objects and vengeful spirits. The concept of a cursed video or recording fits neatly into existing cultural narratives about objects harboring spiritual energy or malevolent intentions. The legend might also reflect the strangeness of some Japanese advertising to both Japanese and international audiences. When commercials are surreal or unsettling, viewers seek explanations. Its cursed becomes a way to articulate the discomfort without analyzing why certain imagery or themes feel wrong. There's also the phenomenon of confirmation bias and selective memory. In any group of people involved in a commercial production, actors, directors, crew, extras, some will inevitably experience misfortune over the following years. It's statistical certainty. People die in accidents, get sick, have relationship problems, and encounter bad luck. When these normal life events happen to people connected with an already strange commercial, the curse narrative provides a convenient explanation. The internet played a crucial role in spreading and elaborating these legends. Websites in the early 2000s dedicated to creepy or paranormal content would post grainy copies of these commercials with ominous warnings. The low video quality, often the result of multiple generations of copying and compression, made the commercials look more sinister than they actually were. YouTube expanded the reach of these legends globally. People around the world could now watch these supposedly cursed Japanese commercials and judge for themselves. The comment sections filled with claims. "I watched this and now I feel weird. My computer crashed right after watching. I had nightmares." These comments reinforced the curse narrative, even though millions of people watched without incident. What's particularly interesting is how the legend evolved over time. Early versions focused on Japanese domestic concerns. Later international versions added new elements, claims that the commercials contained subliminal messages, hidden frames, or audio that affected viewers psychologically. The curse adapted to new audiences and new anxieties. The cursed commercials legend also reflects our relationship with advertising itself. Commercials are inherently manipulative. They're designed to affect our psychology and change our behavior. The idea that a commercial could be cursed plays on our existing unease about advertising's power. If ads can make us buy things we don't need, maybe they can also bring us bad luck. Modern investigations have debunked the specific curse claims. Japanese TV historians have tracked down the people involved in these productions. They're alive and well, living normal lives, with no unusual patterns of misfortune. The commercials themselves have been digitally preserved and analyzed. There's nothing supernatural about them. Yet the legends persist. Videos titled "Cursed Japanese Commercial, Do Not Watch" continue to get millions of views. New curse stories attached to new commercials. The format is too compelling to die. Take something that's already slightly unsettling, claim it caused deaths or misfortune, and watch the legend spread. This is internet-age curse-making in action. You don't need ancient artifacts or mysterious inscriptions anymore. All you really need is a piece of media that's already somewhat strange, something that makes people feel a little uncomfortable. Then you add a claim about deaths or misfortune connected to it. Throw in a warning telling people not to watch, which of course makes everyone want to watch it even more. And finally, you need a platform to spread the story. That's it. That's the recipe for a modern curse, and it works remarkably well. The warning is crucial. "Do not watch this" is perhaps the most effective way to ensure people will watch. Curiosity is more powerful than caution. Every person who watches and experiences nothing unusual might still perpetuate the legend by sharing it with others, adding to the view count, making the cursed video seem more significant. In some ways, these modern curse legends serve the same psychological function as ancient curses. They mark certain things as dangerous, create boundaries around content, and provide narratives that explain misfortune. The Kleenex commercial curse says, "This thing that seems normal has hidden danger." Be cautious about what you consume, what you watch, what you expose yourself to. It's also undeniably entertaining. There's a thrill in watching something supposedly cursed, in testing whether you'll be affected, in joining the community of people who have dared to view forbidden content. The curse gives ordinary commercials significance and mystique they wouldn't otherwise have. The real curse of cursed commercials might be the way they demonstrate how easily misinformation spreads in the digital age, how quickly fictional narratives can become accepted as fact, and how our pattern-seeking brains will find connections even where none exist. That's not supernatural, but it is, in its own way, rather powerful. You've probably received one. An email, a text message, or a social media post that ends with an ultimatum. Forward this to 10 people or you'll have bad luck. Or worse. Share this within 24 hours or someone you love will die. These are digital chain curses, the modern descendants of ancient curse tablets and medieval folk magic, adapted perfectly for the age of instant communication. The evolution of chain curses tells the story of how curses themselves have evolved to match our communication technology. In the pre-digital era, chain letters physically traveled through the mail. The earliest documented chain letter dates to 1888, and they became increasingly common throughout the 20th century. Early versions were often religious in nature: copy this prayer and send it to 5 people to receive blessings. The curse element was often implicit rather than explicit. Failing to forward the letter meant missing out on good fortune rather than actively inviting disaster. But then chain letters discovered explicit threats. The most famous was the send-a-dime letter from the 1930s, which promised wealth if you forwarded it and implied financial ruin if you didn't. Recipients were instructed to send dimes to people on a list, add their own name, and mail copies to friends. It was essentially a pyramid scheme disguised as a blessed chain. With email in the 1990s and 2000s, chain curses exploded. The cost and effort of forwarding dropped to nearly zero. You didn't need to type or print anything, buy stamps, or physically mail letters. You just hit forward and selected names from your address book. This ease of transmission meant chain curses could spread exponentially faster than ever before. Early email chain curses followed familiar patterns. This is a true story. A girl named Sarah received this email and deleted it. The next day, she was hit by a car and died. Another girl forwarded it to 10 people and won the lottery. Forward this to 10 people in the next 5 minutes, or you'll have 10 years of bad luck. The stories became more elaborate and specific. They included dates, names, locations, details that gave them the veneer of truth. They claimed to be tested. This actually works. I ignored one and broke my arm the next day. Then I forwarded it and met my soulmate. The psychological mechanism is simple and effective. The cost of forwarding is minimal, a few seconds, a click. The claimed cost of not forwarding is enormous: death, bad luck, loss of love. Even if you don't believe in curses, the calculation is easy. Why risk it? This is exploiting loss aversion, the human tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains. We're more motivated to avoid potential bad luck than we are deterred by the slight social cost of annoying our friends with spam. As social media replaced email, chain curses adapted again. Facebook, Instagram, and other platforms don't work well with the forward to 10 people model, so curses evolved. They became posts you needed to share to your timeline, or images you needed to repost, or challenges you needed to participate in. Like and share this post, or 5 years of bad luck. Don't scroll past without typing "Amen." Share this to 3 group chats in 10 minutes, or your crush will never like you back. Then came cursed images. In the mid-2010s, internet culture developed a new concept: the cursed image. These were photographs or screenshots that felt wrong in some indefinable way. Not horror movie scary, but unsettling. Uncanny. Pictures of empty swimming pools with liminal lighting. Photographs of figures in mascot costumes in inappropriate contexts. Images that looked like they were taken in dreams or nightmares. The term cursed was initially used metaphorically. These images felt cursed. They gave you a bad feeling. They were aesthetically disturbing. But inevitably, actual curse narratives developed around them. This image has killed 7 people who looked at it for more than 30 seconds. A girl set this as her phone background and disappeared the next day. Don't stare at the eyes in this picture, or you'll have nightmares. Cursed images spawned entire subreddits, Instagram accounts, and TikTok trends. The images themselves were often just ordinary photographs taken from unusual angles or with strange lighting. Their curse came entirely from the context and narrative built around them. Some cursed images became famous enough to develop elaborate backstories. The Wyoming incident was a creepy video accompanied by claims that it was a broadcast hijacking that caused psychological trauma to viewers. Marina Mordegard Gleskorv was allegedly a 20-second video so disturbing that viewers gouged out their own eyes. Neither video actually existed in the forms described, but the legends spread anyway. The power of cursed images lies in their ambiguity. They're disturbing but not explicitly threatening. Your brain tries to make sense of what it's seeing and can't quite manage it. That cognitive dissonance creates unease, which the curse narrative then explains. You feel weird because this image is cursed. Modern cursed content has also embraced the concept of cognitohazards from internet fiction, ideas or images that harm you simply by being perceived. This borrows from science fiction concepts like basilisk hacks, information, patterns that damage minds that process them. While purely fictional, the concept provided new language for curse narratives. What makes digital chain curses particularly interesting is their evolution to exploit platform-specific features. WhatsApp chains use the platform's group chat and broadcast features, targeting tight-knit social networks where social pressure to participate is highest. TikTok curses embed themselves in challenges and trends, making the curse participation look like normal platform behavior. Instagram story chains exploit the temporary nature of stories and the ease of reposting, creating urgency. The psychology behind why people share chain curses is actually pretty complex. Sometimes it's social obligation. When someone sends you something directly, there's this implicit pressure to respond. Then there's magical thinking, where even skeptics engage in just-in-case reasoning. The cost of sharing is so low, so why risk it? Some people share ironically, treating it as a joke while still technically participating in the curse. And of course, some people, especially younger users, genuinely believe in the curses and share out of real fear. There's also fear of missing out on potential good luck, even if you don't believe in the bad luck. Chain curses have also become a form of social bonding. Sharing them is a way to include friends in a shared experience, even if everyone involved knows it's silly. The curse becomes an inside joke, a cultural touchstone, a way to test who in your network will play along. But digital chain curses can have real negative effects. They contribute to information overload and digital clutter. They train people to share content without thinking critically about it. They can cause genuine anxiety in younger or more superstitious users. They sometimes serve as vectors for actual scams, with malicious actors embedding links or phishing attempts within curse chains. There have been cases of children experiencing real distress from chain curses. A 12-year-old might intellectually know that not forwarding a message won't kill their mother, but the anxiety it creates is real. The Momo Challenge panic of 2018 to 2019, while largely a moral panic with few actual incidents, showed how fear of cursed digital content can spread through communities and cause genuine harm even when the underlying threat is fictional. The future of digital curses will likely involve new technologies. Virtual reality curses that create immersive threatening experiences. AI-generated cursed content that adapts to individual users. Blockchain curses that are permanently embedded in digital art. The technology changes, but the human impulse to create and share curse narratives remains constant. In the end, the only curse that's real is the one you believe in. And even then, the power comes not from external supernatural forces, but from the very human tendency to find patterns, assign meaning, and share stories that help us make sense of our fears. That's not magic, that's just being human. Tonight we've journeyed through centuries of curses, from the sealed tomb of Tutankhamun to the viral spread of digital chain letters. We've explored how curse narratives adapt to each era while maintaining remarkably consistent structures. The warning, the transgression, the consequence. We've seen how some curses reflect genuine historical events and human tragedies, while others emerge purely from imagination and spread through the power of storytelling. Whether we believe in supernatural curses or understand them as psychological and social phenomena, they reveal fundamental truths about how humans process fear, loss, and the unknown. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the shadows of curse legends and the psychology behind them. If you're already drifting off, then our mission is complete. But if you're still awake, perhaps another deep dive through one of our previous episodes will carry you gently into slumber. Until we meet again in these quiet hours, may your dreams be free from ancient warnings. May coincidences remain just coincidences. And may you find comfort in knowing that the only curses with real power are the ones we grant that power ourselves.